Hi, I'm Colin Morgan, executive producer of Built to Sell Radio. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, you're going to absolutely love our new newsletter, Built to Sell News. We share actionable tips and insights to help you get inside the mind of an acquirer and punch above your weight when it comes time to exit. To subscribe, simply head over to builttosell.com/subscribe to sign up for free today.
Brock Weatherup, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Excited to be here.
You've been a prolific entrepreneur. I've got Pet 360, Pet Coach, Great Pet. A lot of people will be familiar with those brands, especially if they have a pet. Sold to Petco and PetSmart, big brands that everybody's heard of. So we've decided, we were talking a little bit before, to do this interview as sort of a landscape of your entire career, which is pretty spectacular. So thanks for doing this.
Oh, well, thanks. It's I love the world of building businesses, and I've been lucky enough to be lucky in it.
Well, I'm sure there's probably a little bit more than luck there, which we're going to dig into today. So before you got into pets, though, you started a business co-founded a business called Fathead, which has got a peculiar name. I'm dying to know what you did at Fathead and how that all ended.
Yeah, so Fathead was a business where we created a pretty dynamic brand in the sports and entertainment world. So very quickly, the business was, if you love Tom Brady and you were a fan of Tom Brady and you wanted a life-size cutout, quote unquote, poster of Tom Brady, you want to stick it on your wall, that's what we sold. And your dynamics of your Pittsburgh Steelers fan or you're a New York Yankees fan or whatever, or Toronto Blue Jays, whatever way it might be, those sorts of things were always in that sort of dynamic. And we created a direct-to-consumer brand that was, frankly, challenging people about how are you fan enough of your team? And if you're a fan enough, then you should have one of these gigantic things on your wall. So joined that and was a part of that. We kind of went from 0 to 100 miles an hour, kind of right out of the gate, building this really interesting brand, which was a lot of fun. And in those sorts of dynamics of how do you get consumers to be motivated to spend $100 on basically a piece of vinyl.
How big did you get Fathead before you exited?
We were in the high $30 million of revenue after 2.5 years, wow. almost 3 years.
This is a rocket ship from zero.
It exploded.
Wow.
Look, you're building on the back of kind of decent brands like the NFL and the NBA and the NHL, and so you have a lot of dynamics that really help you kind of get from here to there. But we got I'll use lucky a lot, and I use working hard to get lucky, and you can't get lucky without working hard. We'll talk about that another time, but. This was, we hit a vein, and it really kind of connected with people that, the sort of I you want to be a real fan. And the kind of one of the cool things was also the stars of the sport really loved our product because it was them in their finest moments, life size, without anything, because we die cut around the image. So if you had go back to Tom Brady, if Tom Brady was making a pass, we had to have a picture of him all by himself. And we would create a die cut around him, so you would see none of the background, none of the play. It would just be him in his finest glory. He's not hawking potato chips or selling insurance. He's playing the game that he was so good at, and that would be on your wall. So that created some fun dynamics there for sure.
And you're doing rev shares back to the league, or how?
Yeah, you have different sorts of programs. I learned all this when I was there, which I maybe I should have learned more of it before I dove into it. But the whole world of kind of commissions and how do you have kind of licensing fees and what does that look like, and learned all of those kind of very quickly on how do you navigate that. So it was a percentage of revenue of anything you sold was the rights to. What you had. So when you sold a Tom Brady, you had, a certain amount that went back to the NFL because of the logo of the New England Patriots at the time, right? Or a certain percentage of revenue that actually went to the Players Association and thus to Tom Brady. So that was kind of the dynamic of the structure.
And you were a partner, you had equity in this business?
Yeah, I was the CEO and co-founder of it. So it had been a tinkerer, I'll call kind of entrepreneur, had kind of created the idea. Doing large scale die cut, high definition printing was not an easy thing then. It's a hell of a lot easier now, just with the pieces with it. But grew that business and had it going very well. And the primary capital behind it was a couple folks that were, obviously kind of very wealthy. They had built Quicken Loans. And so one was Dan Gilbert, another guy, David Katzman, who had, owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, which allowed us to get into the leagues a bit easier. And so they were, combined the majority owners, of the dynamics. And that was what got us to be able to get going with a decent amount of capital pretty quick.
And you mentioned there was a bit of a fork in the road where there was an ethical dilemma. When we talked before hitting record, you reached some sort of ethical dilemma. Maybe describe what happened.
Yeah, we were. So this was, this would have been fall of 2008 or summer of 2008. I tried to raise capital to, in essence, buy them down as owners to make them minority. There was some dynamics between the two primary owners that was causing issues in the business, and long story for another day. But I wanted to figure out a way to put the right investment in the business with the right type of ownership and the right sort of dynamics with it, and went through, the fall of 2008, literally my first day of my roadshow going out to try and raise the money, which was going to be a lot of money, was in New York City when Lehman collapsed, literally that Monday. So not the time to be walking around New York City with your handouts like, hey, invest a lot of money in a premium product that's a luxury item. That was not great. But worked really, really hard just figuring out how to do it, and got an investor to the finish line with it. And we were literally a week-ish away from signing and wiring. We went to a Cleveland Cavaliers game to kind of celebrate. That's a benefit of having the owner of an NBA team. And during halftime, me and my CFO and a few other folks with our new potential owners or majority owners were in luxury suite. Everything else, we're sitting talking, and down below. And Dan Gilbert walks in and basically says, "I'm sorry, guys, the deal's over. This isn't happening. I don't want to do it." And then that's all he said. Turn around, walk back out. Okay.
He was the guy who's going to be selling his shares.
Yeah. And it was like, okay. Anyway, so it just killed it. Fast forward, that was probably, call it November, maybe October, November. And then, so that stopped that path. It didn't really change the business. I was trying to solve some dynamics that made me leading the business difficult, but still was kind of navigating it. And then was like, okay, we're going forward. And the business, which was not not necessarily the easiest business to manage and run. We did basically 80% of our revenue in basically 8 weeks leading up to Christmas. So not a way you'd ever want to run a business, but the rest of the year, you're kind of like holding on to get to Christmas. And then you got to hope you land it right at Christmas. And so we had, great Christmas season, like usual. We kind of get to basically New Year's and New Year's Day. Now, mind you, again, this is the end of 2008 going into 2009, right? The bottom of the market was March of 2009. Oh, by the way, much of the money that was coming into this was from the mortgage loan industry, from Quicken Loans. So it was a tough place, and, learned the rules of kind of what is ownership, what are signing authority on bank accounts and things like that, and got a call from my CFO on New Year's Day, 2009. And she's like, Brock, what happened to all the money in our account? I'm like, what do you mean happened to all the money in our account? And she's like, well, we have $0 in our bank account. I'm like, what do you mean we have zero? This is right after Christmas. So it's when you're flush with cash. We also have a lot of bills you got to pay, but we're flush with cash. And basically it was all swept. And I was like what transpired? And the next basically 4 or 5 weeks were probably one of the most difficult 4 or 5 weeks of my entire career. Was trying where's the money? Is it going to come back? There were promises of we literally, I'll never forget, probably 3 days later, I had our team put together a special promotion to hopefully sell some more product, because I wasn't going to be able to make payroll on Friday, because there was literally $0, not close to zero.
Where was literally go?
It was swept because, oh, by the way, in the mortgage industry market, if you had $10 million or whatever, you could leverage it 100x, right? And so capital, other things were, again, super dynamic world of what was going on in the mortgage loan sort of world. So I think there was a factor of gathering all this cash so that it could be leveraged for, again, things were cratering in the mortgage world. So, whether, you could say it's right or wrong or different, but all of a sudden it turned into like, okay, how am I going to make payroll on Friday? And then, so we made payroll by doing a promotion, and then you got, okay, 2 weeks to the next payroll, but you got a whole bunch of people to pay bills. I'm reaching out to, I never actually talked to Dan Gilbert, but talked to his team. But it kept being like, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. And so I started like having to say to vendors, like, after a little bit, like the payment's coming, the payment's coming, the payment's coming. And so by the end of the month, as you can imagine, and no money came back. So just all of the money to pay out wasn't. And so I was starting to lie, and I was starting to not tell the truth. It was brutal. Both to like, I didn't know what to tell my team. My leadership team, I was 100% open with them. So kind of your first tier group, I'm like, guys, like, we're going, I can't, I'm an open book, for better or for worse. And 100% honest. And I couldn't not until we're kind of going through all of it. And it finally manifested itself in where like, I didn't know whether I was being a hindrance to the money coming in or what, but like, I couldn't be responsible because it was my name. And it was my sort of, my reputation, and that's the one thing you can actually control.
Sure.
And so I literally finally had a meeting on the book, supposedly with Dan and his team, and I had my resignation letter in my back pocket, and was going to basically like, I can't do this anymore. And they I was fighting like hell, so and was starting to, I'll say, cause issues because it was wrong. And I left a message for Dan and his team, and wrote an email that was not flattering about the situation. So, but I played that message also for my entire leadership team. So they weren't wondering what I said to anybody. It was like, this is actually what I said. You've heard me say it. Just because, people interpret things however they want. And I was like, this is likely going to get me fired, or I'm going to resign. And sure enough, that happened, and I got fired. I got walked by, a bunch of the dynamics. I got walked by his security guards very publicly through the office to my desk to be escorted out of this company that I built. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. And on the drive home, I'll never forget, I called my wife, and she'll tell you the story, but hey, and she knew this was going on. So, but there's a big difference of it might happen and it does happen. Mm. And she was literally like in the car going to the preschool where our preschooler was at school, and she was going to be she was the special reader for the day. Oh, I got fired, I'm coming home. Anyway, it horrible situation, but the importance of having, or the value for me of having an incredible partner in my life, and my wife to grab me when I got home, and my family and friends that were around me to be like, okay, we're going to figure this out. But like, it was awful, and I had invested a lot on a percentage basis of my liquid capital into the business.
Yeah, so I'm curious about. So I understand your job ended as CEO, but what happened to the equity that you had built in the company?
So I had invested $300,000, which for me was a gigantic sum of money, and of my liquid. We have our house and stuff, but a gigantic sum of my money, probably 50+% of my liquid, if not more. So invested that, and then I got a meaningful chunk of ownership, like 10% ownership of the company. I got a check about what would have been about 10 years later after that, for my ownership and my $300,000 that I invested for $9.26.
So I didn't mean to laugh, but really?
Yep. I actually could go through my files and pull out the check and show you. No, it was literally $9.26, and they were cleaning up the cap table because the business had $95 million worth of debt on it, and all this. Anyway, I don't actually know what happened behind all of it. I don't actually know anything that's going on, but it was a horrible situation where I had to make the choice of, do I keep lying, or do I kind of throw my reputation and my own personal sort of ethics and morals out the window, or do I fight for what it is and know that there's a huge risk of what that would do? Now, I look back on it and I'd say it was an incredible launch pad to something unbelievably amazing out of it. But that's the optimist in me. At the time, I was not in that sort of situation, so don't get me wrong. But all of a sudden, I'm now in Michigan. It's spring. It's literally February of 2009. The housing crisis was particularly damaging in Michigan. The economy in Michigan was crushed. I didn't have a job. I was a startup CEO of something. And what was I going to do? Right. And I lost a ton of money. We had renovated part of our house, but our value of our house was down, I think 30% by the time it was a disaster on every front. I was like, okay, what do you do next? Luckily, had met, in the effort to try and basically get some folks to be investors in the business, had met a lot of what I would call kind of consumer middle market venture capital firms, because they were going to be the potential investors. And I must have impressed a few of them, because when that all kind of went down and it got blown up, received a call from a number of them to talk with them about different sort of opportunities. And that's what jumped me into the pet industry when I took a job at what was Pet Food Direct that I turned into Pet 360 in Philadelphia.
So what a story. I mean, unbelievable. Let's get into Pet 360 a little bit, because this business you joined as CEO, and presumably at some point you built up some equity in it as well.
Yeah, it was petfooddirect.com. Not hard to remember or imagine what petfooddirect.com was. It was early days of Amazon, early days of things that Chewy didn't exist, those sorts of things. So I joined there. It was a business doing slightly less than 20 million in revenue. It had lost $7-8 million the year prior. And so not in a good situation at all. The investment group that was in it was looking for a new CEO, and they kind of reached out to me. And, at first when I talked to them, I said, there's no way in hell I'm taking this job because it's a disaster. I wrote a memo dating myself, but an email memo of here's all the things that need to be done. And their response to that was, okay, we'd like you to do that. What would it take to get you? And they brought me in. And so, and my whole deal was hey, look, 18 months, let's figure out there's a business model here. I need money to do that. But after 18 months, then we're either going to put lipstick on the pig and go figure out what we can get for it, or we're going to go out and raise some growth capital and really grow the business. And luckily and wonderfully in that 18 months, just focused on people, focused on execution, focused on the model. And we figured out that there was a business there. And so at the end of that 18 months, we went out and we changed the name of the business to a company called Pet 360. We launched a media business with it, with a brand called PetMD, think WebMD for pets. And then we went out and raised a growth capital round of almost $20 million to kind of grow and drive the business, because it had a meaningful opportunity to get there. And I had gone through and transitioned a lot of people out and a bunch of people in, and tried to do my best to, kind of get great people to do great things and give them the tools to do it. And we found a way to get there. Eventually, 5 years later, we were approached by PetSmart to be acquired, because PetSmart did not have an online. We were about $100 million of e-commerce and about $15 million worth of media revenue. And at the time, PetSmart was I think $6-7 billion business, but was doing less than $50 million of online revenue at the time. And we were doing 100 million. And so they went to they approached us and acquired us, and went through that process.
I'd love to go through the PetSmart acquisition. But I'm just curious to know how the shares, how they structured your equity compensation in Pet 360. We're all about selling equity. So that's the reason why I'm asking, were you able to, when the middle market VCs said, hey, can you come run this for us? You didn't have a lot of negotiating leverage. To your point, the house was down, the market's in a tank. You've just come out of this terrible situation. Were you able to negotiate some options or some equity, or like how did you structure your?
Yeah, got in some equity. Was in kind of how the structure of the investment. There was an investment of some money, obviously, before I got there to get it to that point, and that created a structure. I didn't understand at the time what a term participating preferred means for an investor.
Can you describe that?
Yeah. So what that means is this was the dynamic was a 2 times participating preferred. And what that means is if you are an investor coming in and you invest $10 million, that you are in essence guaranteed $20 million when there's a sale of the business or a liquidity event out of the business. And then everything else gets allocated after that. So if you have, just to make the math easy, right, if you have a $100 million valuation and you had $20 million invested in at a 2 times participating preferred, you would basically say you'd have $100 million minus $40 million. So the 20 million times 2. And then the value of the business that's paid to shareholders is actually 60 million, not 100 million. So I did not understand that at the time, but I learned. But had options, had kind of equity in it, and own in kind of a 5% ish sort of dynamic with it from an options base and everything else. And when we finally ended up getting that point to an exit, we sold it for about $200 million. And that was great for our investors. It was wonderfully generous for me, and I didn't, of what it was. But I would have expected, in some respects, in retrospect, a lot more as a personal outcome of it because of this whole participating preferred, the structure of equities, all the things that went along with it. And so, the things that you learn in the dynamics of how do you structure your equity, how do you structure the cap table, how do you structure voting rights, how do you structure, are all those sorts of things that are much easier learned after you've gone through them than before.
So this is super helpful for our audience because many will be considering raising money, and this idea of preferred shares is something they should be very mindful of for sure. So in your case, the investors, these middle market M&A folks, had participating preferred shares with a 2x. So they got 2 times their money before the common shareholders and the options holders, in your case, would be entitled to anything. And so that washes out a lot of the equity in the event of a sale. Got it. Okay. Interesting. And at what point in the journey did you learn about this participating preferred share structure? Like, was it on the final?
It was exactly on the last days where you are, when you sell to somebody that on a large scale, like a large strategic in this sort of scenario. Obviously, there's like teams and teams and teams of lawyers, but the one thing you do have to do as the CEO is you have to sign off on the flow of funds. So, which is, okay, we're going to write a check for $200 million. Where does that $200 million go? Right. Typically in that sort of scenario, there's a 5% or 10% holdback for, potential sort of issues. So, okay, now I've got 200 million, now I got 180 million. That difference of money will get paid out eventually in the same flow. But what's the waterfall? Like what pays off the debt? What pays off the other things? What goes to the institutional shareholders that have participating preferred? What goes at that? What goes to then shareholders at what are the volume of those and what types of shares and what are the terms? So if you have preferred versus common, is there preferred A, preferred B, common, there's different structure of all those sorts of things. And then you get into the calculation. Okay, if you give away options, okay, well, if you're selling at X, then okay, well, again, my point being is you kind of go through the whole thing. And it was interesting, when we ended up getting officially closed or getting to the point of closing, we're literally wiring the money on Friday, and it was Thursday. And we got some feedback from our folks at PetSmart, and they're like, we can't close the deal because the numbers don't match. I'm like, what do you mean the numbers don't match? So there's a flow of funds memo, which is a certified thing that you have to sign as the CEO, which is a very legally binding, very important document. And then there's the spreadsheet, right? And those two things, exactly how they all come together. and they were off by 26 cents.
Okay.
But they have to be perfect. It can't be off. Right? And now, granted, it was a whole lot of calculations with a whole lot of half pennies, with a whole lot of other things, and but it had to be exact. And I was like, okay, you got to be kidding me! Like 26 cents, like okay, they're like, I'm just like, just take it out of mine. Like fine, like whatever. And they're like, well, we can't do that because you have a legal signature. So I get it. And so oh, okay, well, we'll go check and we'll just so yeah, I literally ended up going back in with my CFO and in this gigantic spreadsheet with so many calculators, I found 4 times back in what I was being paid, and I literally added into a cell minus 0.26. And I was like, oh, we found the error, everything's fixed. And then they wired it on Friday. So, but learning the waterfall and what those things look like, it's always different. It's always less than what an entrepreneur or CEO thinks it's going to be. I'd say 99 out of 100 times, that's not what you think it's going to be. Doesn't mean it's not great. Doesn't mean it's not amazing. But I'll call it clean math thought process. I own 10%. I'm selling it for 100 million, so I get 10 million.
10 million.
Never works out. Now, it might mean you get 8, which is fantastic, but it's just different.
So in your mind, negotiations heating up, your pillow talk with your wife, talking about the deal and what this could mean for us. You've gone from a house that's worth a third less and losing your $300,000. And I'm assuming there's a lot of pillow talk at home saying, hey, this could be really important for us. Financially, there could be a big event. So what's the delta between the pillow talk number and the actual number? Do you know what I'm asking? I'm saying if you thought, you and your wife thought we're going to get $100. Obviously, it was more than that, but I'm just using that as a round number. What did you end up getting? How big was the erosion of the actual number?
Well, it's especially on the first one, it's a little bit funny money, right? Because now mind you, my wife and I have always lived kind of within our means. And by the way, 5 years prior to that, we'd had our kind of rear ends kicked by the exit of Fathead, where we kind of lost our shirt. So something more than nothing was great.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I think a huge amount of it is what is your expectations going in and what does that look like? And so I think you're quite I think it depends what your mindset is when you're going into it, how much that affects you in that sort of pillow talk sort of dynamic, right? We were just happy to have a path out, right? Just something. Okay. And to get somewhere, because we had such a brutal experience from a number of different things that caused some real change in our life that we didn't really want, or the timing that we wanted. And part of the story that also goes into it, when we were selling to PetSmart, we had signed a deal July 1st, and then 2 days or 3 days later, so an LOI, right? So and it's a public company, so it's binding also. 2 days later, it was announced that an activist investor had taken a stake in PetSmart. And so I learned what the world of activist investors are and how much that throws boardroom conversations into turmoil. And okay.
How did that affect your deal?
Well, so we had 30 days to get to definitive docs, right? And sign the deal. And so we were kind of, so it was I got a call 2 days later from when this came out. The CEO from PetSmart called me and said, everything's fine. it's all good. I'm like, okay. I didn't know. I was I didn't know what the thing was. And it's okay. But he said, everything's fine. It's all still going. So fine. Everyone's rolling through. Again, teams of lawyers everywhere, figuring this out, putting it all together. We're about a week away from where we would sign. So pretty much everything has been figured out. So myself, my leadership team, it couldn't go below our leadership team because it was a public company. And so you couldn't have public information. So my leadership team all knew what they were getting paid as part of the deal. I knew what I was getting paid. So which is what everyone pays attention to, right?
Sure.
And what are those things that come out of it? And I get a call from the CEO of PetSmart a week before we're supposed to sign it. And he says, the deal's off. And I'm like, excuse me? I'm like, what do you mean the deal's off? We're done. We're there. And he's like, well, the activist investor, a bunch of things, we can't do the deal. And I'm like, well, what do you mean we can't do the deal? Now, mind you, underneath it, the process had taken very long, which if you're selling to a large strategic, it's a very long process. It's not it's not like you call up somebody and negotiate a deal and you're done. Like it was months and months and months and months. And so we had gotten a bit like too far out over our skis in terms of debt and other things like that. And so we were in, we needed to sell, if I'm being honest with you, like in order to kind of where we were in the business, or we were going to have to do some drastic things. So I got a call, like the deal's off. I'm like, what do you mean the deal's off? Like, we're like seeing other people, but we're going to get back together. Like, that's it. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the scenario is. And, and he goes, well, the deal's off. Like, we can't do this. And I was like, so I got off. I never forget. It was a Friday night. I literally I was talking on the phone as the sun was going down. And like, I remember like literally like by the time my wife came into our living room, like it was a dark room. And I was like, literally just like, my head was down, my hands were on my knees. Like, it just was like, what am I going to do? Right. Like, you're the CEO of this business. And again, your leadership team is they're already writing the checks. They're already cashing the checks, excuse me. So I think it's meaningful. It's meaningful to me, but like a little bit less for me in the moment. Yes, it was about me. So don't like, I had lots of feelings, but most of it was like, oh no, what are we going to do? Like, we've got hundreds of people in our organization. Like, what am I going to do at this? Like we're in debt. We got a problem. So, and I was like, I didn't talk to anybody on that Saturday except my wife and actually my family. And because I'm like, what I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I literally just don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. Like, I can't, so, and you got to be a leader. You got to figure out a way to step in and do something. Doing nothing helps no one, and being a, withering, crying, bumbling idiot is not going to do anything either. And so, called a couple of key folks on my leadership team and our investors, our primary investors on that Sunday, which was not a set of fun conversations to say the least. And then Monday morning, it was like, okay, like, what are we going to do? And over the next, basically, what went up being 10 days, I pulled my leadership team together. We did an offsite, and like the outcome of the offsite was like, we're literally going to have to lay off 40% of our team. We're going to have to like do all sorts of things like that were really ugly, really not great. So I might be sharing this like, well, okay, well, how did it end up that the deal got closed? So after 10 days of this, and mind you, we had put the board deck together that we were going to go over kind of it was a Thursday, that following Monday. And, but I was like, okay, I literally had it in my inbox for about a year. I never actually hit send, because, so that was a Thursday night, we were done. And it was a brutal deck, like the deck you never want to send. And I didn't, I guess, but like, it was sitting in my inbox. And then, the next day, got a call back from the CEO of PetSmart, who said, hey, we'd like to do the deal. And I'm like, okay, well, wait a second. Like, first off, I'm like jumping out of my skin, excited about it, but I'm like, okay, wait, I went through this once. Like, well, I'm not going to go through this again. Sure. And we just went through this brutal 10 days. I mean, brutal 10 days. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, what are you talking? He's like, well, we were announcing our earnings on Tuesday. This is Thursday. So we're announcing our earnings on Tuesday. So we'd like to put it in our earnings announcement on Monday night. So we would get it. I'm like, well, I mean, there's like we were, you're most of the way done and finishing all the documents, but we didn't get all the way there. And usually the last issues are the big ones that are hard. Mm-hmm. And so like literally in 2 days, so through Friday and Saturday, we got all of the rest of the documents done together, signed. I mean, Herculean effort and basically we needed it done by Sunday morning because it needed to go through the whole legal process of public company filings. And so, Sunday night we were in the path of, okay, like we're getting this deal done. We set up stuff and we announced it. It was announced publicly and to our team, our broader company, Monday night that the deal was happening and everybody was happy.
Did you ever find out what changed with the active investor? Did they agree to go forward? Or
no. I think it was an agreement to actually then like what the process was to take PetSmart private. So what I didn't understand was going on also behind all of this was that there was discussion of PetSmart being taken private, and they needed an e-commerce strategy to maximize their value. So what ended up happening was after they closed the deal with us, like a month later, like I'm in conference rooms in Phoenix, like talking to the TPGs and Blackstones and others to sell, do a $8 billion deal to sell PetSmart to take it private. And I was representing the digital strategy of it. And I think it was just some confluence of that. Like I'm never going to know. And honestly, in some respects, I don't really want to know, because it was just like, it's a wound I don't want to open up again to really understand, because it was brutal. It was brutal on every front, as a leader, as a human, as a person, as somebody who cares about other people. But it was brutal. When you're going from, hey, everyone's going to make a lot of money, everyone's going to be great, isn't this going to be wonderful too? We're going to fire half our staff, and this is going to be like a total mess for a long time till we get it cleaned up. And here's where we are.
What advice would you have for an entrepreneur who feels kind of stuck in the middle between being loyal to their employees and managing up to an investor? So you've gone through this twice, and maybe additionally in other experiences, where you've got a team who has joined you, is loyal to you, who in the case of Fathead, had nothing to do with the money being swept out of the account, but at the same time, your majority shareholder was doing something that you didn't control. And in this case, PetSmart makes an acquisition and then they rescind. And again, you've got a team who it's impacting. I've seen this done in two different ways. One, great leaders engender the loyalty of their team by being truthful and saying, hey, it's them, not me. And they shoulder, but sometimes lose credibility over the long run when that keeps happening to them. Equally, I've seen leaders sort of say the party line and say, what PetSmart wants you to say to the rank and file employees, but lose loyalty to the rank and file employees because it just looks like a stuffed shirt who, is just basically, recounting the party line. How do you thread that needle between keeping your employees on side and loyal to you personally while something's happening externally, while not undermining your relationship with the external party? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, well, I'd say I'll answer it twofold. The first side is don't raise money. Avoid it at all costs if you can. Doesn't mean investors aren't great. Pet360 wouldn't have gotten where it was without it. So don't get me wrong. We needed it. We wanted it. Fathead wouldn't have launched without it. We needed it. We had to have it. So there are reasons why you need to do that. And so I luckily didn't need to do that with either of kind of both Pet Coach as well as with Metamorphosis or Great Pet. And I would encourage everyone, don't go for the TechCrunch headline article of raising $100 million, or whatever it is. Just don't, if you can, because then you bring more voices into the room, which then creates challenges exactly that you were describing around what does it mean to be a leader of your team. So that's so if you can do it without the capital, great. Or if you can do it with capital on your terms, as you understand how to handle that over time, then great. So that's part A. That being said, most companies need capital. And so if you're in that sort of capital dynamic where you have other people that are, everyone's doing their job, right? The investor that's in your business, with all due respect, doesn't really care about their business. If they're doing their job well, they are making sure that their investment in you makes money, period. They can say all they want, but that's their job. And if they're doing their job really well, they're making a lot of money for their LPs, not for the employees of the company, not for you, but again, I don't blame them. It's just you just got to recognize what people's priorities are. The one thing I would always say, or what at least worked well for me as I kind of kept going through these, and as I learned with a lot of bruises and bumps and lots of other stuff, was just, being genuine and being transparent without transparent to a fault, which is a little bit of a hard, or not as a hard balance, but being genuine of caring and being transparent with it. If you don't know, don't know. If you're saying a party line, say it's your party line. It doesn't mean you say that to everybody, but you say it to your key folks that are, especially your leadership team. If you're the CEO, I would always find in my organizations also who were key, I would say kind of key influencers, using a term of today, but more like who are people who kind of guided or shaped the culture of your organization. So that could have been the marketing manager or the finance accountant, or it could be your, head of operations. I mean, like at all different levels, but like who are those people that you would kind of like, okay, like they're the ones that give me the pulse of what's going on, and how do I stay close to them, and how do I stay transparent? Because they are who would kind of permeate out any sort of feeling about what was going on. And that was a very effective tool that I learned over time, to just identify those people and bring those people close to you. I mean, it was genuine because you cared about them, but they were the barometer of how the organization went on something.
Got it. Yeah, that's super helpful. So you come through this PetSmart experience, and you've got some money in your jeans, and you basically self-fund your next business, Pet Coach. Maybe describe that for folks.
Yes, I had an opportunity. There were a couple founders who had put this very early stage kind of, thing, and it was an opportunity for me to kind of basically buy it. And by buy it, meaning it was like, $1.5 million, which is a lot of money. So don't get me wrong, but, I really liked them, and we had an opportunity to do something really interesting. And I was super impressed with them all the way along. They are the two key folks that were part of that are now very close friends till today. I actually had a call with them earlier today. If I'm being totally honest with you.
What did the business do?
The business was telemedicine for pets. So if you were a pet owner and you had a question about your pet, and most things around pet owners are not urgent, right? Like, hey, if your dog gets hit by a car, like don't go online and start searching. Like take him to the emergency room. But most of the stuff is my dog's lethargic, my dog's itching a lot, my dog, whatever. Like those are kind of more less urgent sort of dynamics. And so this was it. So it was telemedicine before telemedicine was, I guess, cool or acceptable. And it ended up becoming more of a teletext sort of thing. So people would send information. We had vet techs and vets kind of respond, and that created a whole content sort when things like SEO really mattered in the world. And it really worked. Like, we published those things, and it created a very large sort of audience and dynamic.
What a cool business.
It was fun. We created a pretty gigantic audience very quickly. And it worked. And that kind of raised the interest of Petco, because they were looking to kind of turn around a bit of their sort of digital presence and who and what they were. And so the CEO of Petco, who I had known, kind of had reached out to me and said, hey, like we like what you're doing, and we'd like to bring you and your team in. And part of it was what we had built. Part of it was also to be a influence on the culture and the future of what Petco could be. And so I came in, and part of the deal was for me to be kind of the chief innovation and chief digital officer, which I was intrigued by. But the other part of it was also that the other co-founders hadn't put any sort of money in the bank, and they had young families. And so it was an opportunity opportunity for them to get that point where they got something for all of their hard work. I had some. I probably would have stayed with it longer to kind of optimize that part of the outcome. But being a C-suite executive at Petco is not is a fairly lucrative opportunity to be in also. And so that there were a lot of dynamics that were at play there. By the way, like, let's be realistic, Petco is located in San Diego, which is not the most horrible place to have to live. And
from a guy from Michigan.
And so, like we were doing that. And so that all worked out and worked out great. But it was a great opportunity to do that. And thought I had learned a lot by when we sold to PetSmart, to where I became the chief digital officer of PetSmart for a year, again, to take private things. But like, I thought I knew what I needed to have at Petco to be successful in that role, because I had done it very similarly before. I learned a lot and did a lot better at Petco than I did at PetSmart, for sure. But I also had a whole lot that I did not, because I realizing that I'm not the best big company person. And I needed to kind of find a different way to be successful in that sort of environment, and learned a lot on how to do that in a different way, which takes a different set of skills, different sorts of dynamics, different sorts of humility, different sort of learning, whatever you want to call it. And I was not prepared for that.
want to come back to that. We just did a great episode with a guy named James Ashford who sold his company, he's a startup guy, entrepreneur, purebred entrepreneur, sold his company to Sage, the big UK accounting software, and does a great job of describing the difficulty of working in that large enterprise context. And so it's something that we've talked about on this show before. Just before we leave PetCoach, just the economic, describe the business model. The customers paying per minute they are on the phone, or is it a subscription fee they pay?
It was free in a scenario. If you were willing to wait for a 24-hour turnaround time, you could pay to accelerate that, to make it urgent. And there were a couple things like that. And then we created a whole lot of like media around it. So we knew that, you were asking a question about your dog itching. Okay, could we have a anti-itch shampoo be a sponsor of some things around it? We wouldn't integrate it, but we'd have it around it, and that sort of communication with you as a pet parent on what your needs are in that moment. So we had some very targeted stuff in the early days of high quality targeting.
And you mentioned the two founders. You bought the company for $1.5 million, but they hadn't had a liquidity event yet. Wasn't that their liquidity event though, or did you have that?
No, I basically invested. That would be a better way of saying it. And I bought bought a bunch of their equity.
Yeah,
and so they still owned a decent chunk. So I forget the exact number. So these aren't 100% true, but I bought 51% out of it. But the cash went into the business.
Yeah. That makes sense. And so when Petco bought PetCoach, did they roll equity, or did you all?
Yeah, we all did. We all did. So it was different decisions that you make. Like we when we did that, like it was a cash and stock sort of deal, so it's kind of half and half. We signed the deal where they got more of the cash and I got more of the stock. That was a very bad decision on my part personally from a financial perspective.
Why?
It was because it went as equity into a private company, and that company then went public, which was great. So Petco went public. I was like, oh, fantastic. There was some money that came out, but not remotely at the level of what it was. And Petco's stock has not been particularly great. Like it went public at, I think, $16, went up to $28. It's now at $4.
Okay.
And as while I still have a decent amount of ownership there, it's actually buried inside this sort of the private, because when you go public, only a certain amount is sold. But like I don't have any control. I didn't have any control over my ownership in the private. So I get money whenever that entity decides to sell or liquidate anything. And so, what was worth a lot, or then worth a whole lot more, and is now worth basically nothing, or next to nothing, sort of thing is, I just kind of how the flow goes.
Did you have the option to get liquid at that point, or
no?
It was like, no, we want you vested in this company.
Well, again, it was this mix of they were part of it was a little bit of an acqui-hire-ish also of our team, and so like they created appropriately structured. It was like, hey, how do we keep you here for a period of time? And so we had that. And it was the right deal, right time. Like it was the right thing for them. Again, like they're good friends that we're doing business with still to today, and so they have actually made me a lot of money later after that has nothing to do with that deal, but because I did right by them at the time, right? And they're doing right by me, and financially at the moment the math doesn't look good for relative me selfishly. Over time in life, it's been far more valuable than if I had made the other decision. And like, that's a hard thing for people to believe in and understand until you look at it. But like, it was very real to me and very real to the situation of kind of how it's all played out at the end of the day.
Yeah. Makes total sense. Talk about Great Pet, because this is one, again, you founded, I think, and self-funded. That is the most recent exit. What's Great Pet?
Yeah, so that was so it's actually the only one that I would say like was truly started at zero, right? So the other ones I came in, there was a germination of an idea, and then I took it over to made it to whatever it was. This was, I left Petco, didn't know what I wanted to do next. I left Petco because I realized I was not on the corporate side of things, and luckily had a position where I could make choices because of luckily the financial outcome of those sorts of things that had happened before then. My wife was like, wait, what are you doing? Like, you're getting paid this really nice salary at Petco at a very high level. And oh, by the way, you're saying that the job isn't that hard. You're not working very hard. You find it easy to look like you're working hard and things are working and you just quit. And I'm like, yep, I did. It's like, so wait, and now this next thing that you're doing, we don't know what it is. And you're actually not making any money. Actually, quite to the contrary, we're actually going to put money into it so you have a job. So you're buying yourself a job instead of getting paid in said jobs. Anyway, but the opportunity was, could I get a group of people that I'd worked with before, that I loved working in, that I thought were super talented against an industry that we knew, AKA pet. And do that in, kind of day one was, 7 of us, within those other 7, I think 4 of them had worked for me twice before, and the rest had worked for me at least once before. And, we literally sat down, let's create a business. And we did. So we created, kind of content and product. We were an Amazon reseller. We had a bit of a media business. We kind of tried a bunch of things. It was fall of 2019. And so, we were a distributed team before COVID. And then when COVID happened, we were still a distributed team. And the pet industry was very good then, or still is. Yeah. And so that kind of, led to that sort of piece with it. And, we had a great run for a bit. And it was awesome, again, full control, there was nobody else involved. Again, my whole thing of don't take money if you don't have to. We did everything that we wanted to do. We were very successful acquiring things, starting things, doing things, but we made decisions as a team, and that's what we did. And nobody else was around trying to do what we were doing. And so, fast forward to kind of 2 years into that, ended up having some unusual things going on with my body physically, and that, was trying to figure out what was going on, and got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And, and luckily I had an amazing team that, was there and went in. Besides my wife and my parents, they were my leadership team. That's group of 7 people were the first people to know about it, because I was like, look, I don't my brain was obviously not anywhere close to the business. And I literally was like, guys, look, this is what's going on. I am not a CEO right now. I can't participate that way. I'm going to be all over the place. I'm emotional. I've got all these things. I just trying to figure out when somebody says, hey, you have a, incurable neurological degenerative disease. Okay, great. Welcome to the world. What are you going to do now? And and my team was amazing. I was like, look, I'm going to be out for the next month because I can't. I'm going to walk in, I'm going to be here, but don't expect me to actually be here. I might physically be around, but just know I'm off. And they all stepped up and were amazing. And then, a few months later, once I started to get a little bit more understanding of what I was dealing with and what that might look like and how it was going to affect my personal life, because they didn't get MS, I did. And, I was like, what do we do? And so I was like, luckily the business was doing great. And we said said, well, hey, well, I'll back off. I'll be chair. You guys run the business and we'll keep doing it that way. And they were wonderfully honest and open with me with everybody. It's Brock, sorry, you don't know how to do something halfway. You're either in or you're out, and this is your business. And so, we should sell this, whatever we can do out of it. And you need to be out of it if you're actually going to take care of your health first. And, I'm incredibly thankful to them for that, because they had to make a hard choice in kind of what we were having a lot of fun, by the way, as a team. And it was really great. And luckily the business was working, but a story that is not normal in the world. I made 2 phone calls to 2 different companies that I thought might be interested in what we're doing. One said they couldn't because if we had a pet food manufacturer, they would do it. And the other one said, yeah, we'd like it. That'd be great. We had maybe a half-hour conversation about what the deal terms needed to be. And we agreed, and 30 days later it closed.
And the company that you called was who?
Was Covetrus, a company called Covetrus, which at the time was a publicly traded, multi-billion-dollar company that was in the pet industry. The CEO, this guy Ben Wolin, was a great guy that I'd known for a while, and said, hey, I got a great business with a great team, and I need to be out. And I said, look, it needs to be, we negotiated a little tiny bit, but this wasn't about me. I was like, look, I want to take care of my team was, we sold the business for $30 million and, which was an unbelievable sort of outcome for a 24-month-old business. So don't get me wrong. And like, so all the team who took a risk on diving into this, like, and all that 7 that joined, like, all the conversations with them were like, look, hey, you can come work for me, but you're going to get paid half of what you're currently getting paid. You're going to get equity, and hopefully it works. And guess what? It did, and it worked really well for everybody. But it was like, and they continued on, and I had to be out. So like all of a sudden, it was like 30 days later, it closed, it was done, and that day it closed. Like I didn't have a job anymore, right? And so again, I had to focus on other things, which is fine, on my health and stuff. But that's the value of people, right? And like being genuine, it's like how those people keep coming back in your life. If you do that, like it's easy to call people for me today and be like, hey, do you know somebody who knows this, or can you help me do this? Can you leave what you're doing and do this? I got an idea on that, or like, and it's back and forth, and it's just it's genuine in that sort of startup thing. So again, all those sorts of things create different sort of dynamics.
How big was Great Pet when you sold it in terms of either revenue or EBITDA? I'm trying to get a sense of like.
Yeah, we were, we were in the high $20 million or mid $20 million of revenue. And we were slightly profitable, but frankly, we were reinvesting everything that we were making. So it was kind of more, we were managing to zero versus needing to be at zero.
It seems like an unbelievable outcome for a 24-month old business.
It was ridiculous. It was like,
wow.
Well, again, I we touched on this way earlier, but like, look, the reality is like, we definitively got lucky, but we busted our asses to get lucky. And you have to get lucky. Like, I don't say that lightly, because like there's plenty of people who've worked really, really hard, doing really great things and really executed extremely well, that haven't had an outcome or haven't been able to create that. And it's dynamics of the market, the moment, the whatever you want to call it. Like, things happen. But and look, there are some people who get lucky that don't work very hard, but it's a very, very, very small group. And then there's likely, when you talk to most people who have created exits in their life and through entrepreneurship or business building and like, they have busted their rear end for a long time, and then they got lucky, or somewhere along the way got lucky. And again, those two things have to work in conjunction with one another.
But in your case, you put yourself in the position to be lucky because you had spent the bulk of the better part of a decade in the pet industry. So you knew, is it Covetrus? Covetrus, forgive me.
No.
You knew this public company, you knew the CEO, you were on a first name, you had all of the sort of downstream benefits to be able to pick up the phone that a new entrepreneur who doesn't understand the industry would not have that. Right. Got it. And
look, I could start the business because I used my cash. Right. Like and that was an risk cash of a meaningful sum. Like I invested, $1.5 million in it. Like, okay, like that's not a small amount of money. And okay, did that $1.5 million work out to be great? Absolutely. But like, you're taking a risk with it. And then again, all those people that came in did the same thing, but they had done things with me before where they saw the value that can come out of equity compensation, right? By being a owner. And I was, look, yes, I was the primary funding for it, but I was quite generous with the ownership, because I wanted, like, look, it was fun. Like, I know I could have made a lot more money in my career by being hawkish about keeping my, but I also would have had a lot less fun, would have had a lot less kind of gratitude and comfort and positive, like all the things that I like being a really, I'd say, a happy person, because doing things hopefully right. Not everything was right, and I've made plenty of mistakes and haven't done lots of things in the right way, but I'd like to say hopefully more than not, I've been in that sort of realm, and you put your energy into that. And at the end of the day, it keeps paying off dividends over and over and over and over again as time keeps going on.
I know a lot of listeners to this show are interested in acquisition entrepreneurship. Have you heard anything about this sort of trend that the MBA students are learning about acquisition entrepreneurship? Does Is that some model you've heard about?
Explain what that means.
Yeah. So I think it started at Stanford. I think it's now kind of trickled across most of the big MBA schools. These are MBA kids who get a degree in acquisition entrepreneurship, which basically means that they are looking to buy a business out of school. And because most, recently minted graduates don't have a lot of money, they're going to these search funds where backers, are backing them and they might get 10% of the equity, and then maybe they have a chance to earn additional tranches of equity if they hit certain thresholds in the future. So kind of sounds a little bit like the Pet 360 experience, the Fathead experience, where you're a minority shareholder, you've got backers, and you're kind of building it day to day.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're also considering starting a business from scratch, right? Like you did with Great Pet. And I'd be remiss not to ask you, since you've done both, what advice you would have for somebody that's at that fork in the road saying, I could maybe raise money to buy a business, but I'd be a minority shareholder and I could run it. Or I could start a business that might be a little smaller, but I'd own it. Like, if someone's at that fork in the road, what questions would you have them ask themselves?
Well, there's a few different layers. I think there's the starting point, which is just if somebody's trying to build a business to sell it, they're not going to be very successful. If you're building a business to create a great business, you will likely find a way to sell it and create and those usually work in that sort of way. So you have to be excited and enthused and interested in what you are in. You need to want to figure it out. You need to want to work through all the dynamics of how something is a mess and how difficult things are. Like, everyone's business plan is wrong early in any business you put in. It's just fundamentally wrong, and that's okay. You just don't know it. You go in, you're like, yeah, I know everything I'm going to do. Right? There's no business plan I've ever put together in any startup that's ended up anything like what it was supposed to. But it was really important for me for what I needed to know, for me to learn, for me to ask, and surround myself with great people who knew different skills than I knew, so that we weren't all kind of talking in the same echo chamber, so that we could create great outcomes, so that when you have the things go wrong in your plan, you have a path to make them right or change the plan and make it better one. You need that sort of, so one, I would always encourage, why are you going into it, and what are you hoping to get out, and do you actually care? Right? Or is this just, I read about it in my MBA class that I should, right? I mean, and that's that being said, I was able to go in and do all of these things because I worked in a couple large organizations, and I learned how business worked, and I learned what was necessary to make a business grow and how those things were going to. And so, whether that was my first job at American Express or kind of a good, 7 years at what is now Interactive Corp or IAC at Ticketmaster and Match and that sort of stuff, I learned a ton. And that, the ability then to quote unquote buy a business and do something great with it, then great. If you want to go start it, go start it. Go make a great business and go figure it out. But you got to be excited about what you're doing. And you got to go into it kind of eyes wide open, that you don't know much coming out of school. You think you do. And oh, by the way, that sort of unbridled enthusiasm, or frankly kind of structure of you don't know anything. And oh, by the way, you don't know anything and you're willing to take risks with it is of massive value at that stage, right? And there's huge benefits for that. And so how do you leverage that? And so, and then the last point, I think, to the core of your question, is what's the math, right? What's the math look like, when you kind of get there? Because again, I owned a very small piece of a very large outcome, or I think $200 million still is a big outcome.
$200 million is a huge outcome.
So I made some in that for sure, right? I owned, 50+% of a deal selling Pet Coach. I think we sold it for $15 million. Okay, well, I made more in that deal personally than I did in the Petco in the original deal. So sell a business for $200 million, make a certain amount. Sell a business for 15 million and make a lot more. Like, how much do you own of it, right? So again, as you think about it, but doing a business from scratch, right, that hasn't been started versus buying one, like, has a whole other different set of risk. And I probably the single largest thing I'd say to anybody who's going into it, like, the idea that you're going to bat 1,000 as a startup is non-existent. So, like, it's okay and expected, frankly, that you're probably not going to succeed in your first business, and go into it knowing you can't be a one-trick pony, right? You're going to go in, you're going to try something, you're going to learn, you're going to figure out what you like to do, what you're good at, what you are capable of doing, what you're willing to do, where you're willing to take risk, where you're not willing to, and be very open to that. And that then guides you, like, oh, I could actually do this. And it's likely how you're going to be in that second, third, or, if you want to dive into other businesses down the line.
Yeah, we've talked about this idea of training wheels businesses. For a lot of us, we have to get a couple under our belt before we're getting any good at it. Which is one of the great reasons to sell early and kind of get on to the next thing, so you can learn. And are you up for a quick lightning round before I let you go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sleaziest trick an acquirer has tried to play on you in the process of selling a business?
Sleaziest trick. It's hard because it's the lying or the hiding of things inside the P&L, like those sorts of things where you're just like, oh yeah, there wasn't a lawsuit thing, there wasn't, like, I've had some things where, like, we acquired something and, like, it had a trademark issue, kind of important to disclose. You hope you're covered in the sort of deal. Like, it was a smaller deal, but, like, those sorts of things. And they just kind of like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. You're like, yeah, sure. No. So
this is when you're buying a business or investing in one.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
What about selling one? What about on the other side?
Well, like, look, everybody needs to go into any business that they're going to sell. And you will 99% of the time get a retrade in the last minute. Meaning, I was offering you X, right? And then it was, so, like, when we sold Pet360, like, I think our deal was $240 until, like, a week before the, kind of, and then it was like, when we signed the LOI. So not the whole other story, but, like, when we signed the LOI, and then, like, right up before we actually signed the LOI, no, it's going to be 200. There's, a board man. And look, yeah, like, were we desperate? Yeah. Did they know it? I guess. But everyone does a retrade of something, whether it's a term or a structure or an absolute dollar. Like, look, they're doing their jobs well if they're buying your business to maximize their outcome, and they're doing their jobs well. If they're not doing that, they're likely not doing their job well. So,
emotional high of selling a business. Can you is there a memory that when it comes to selling a business, whether it was PetSmart, Petco, to Petco, or the great pet experience, is there an emotional high that you recall?
Yeah, seeing an extra comma in my bank account. No, I'm serious. I think you just kind of, like, it's things that you dream of, right? Like, and okay, like, okay, you're in the thousands of dollars, fine. Right. But you never have more than thousands of dollars in your bank account, right? And all of a sudden, like, it stays there for like a day because you want to get it out of your bank account, like, immediately, right. But you got to give them the wiring information. But, like, I mean, like, and look, no deal is done until the money is in your bank. So nobody should think of anything is done until the money is physically in your bank and you see it. And, like, that was really cool to, like, walk over to my wife and be like, look, like, this landed in our bank account, and it added a comma.
What was her reaction?
It's extraordinary.
What was her reaction?
I think just kind of blown away that, we're not spenders on things, and all of a sudden it's like, how did this happen? Like, we a little bit pinch ourselves still to today, like, where we live and what we do and the resources that we do have. And we're like, how did we end up here? Like, yeah, like we're actually like, is that even real? Like, it doesn't feel real, right? But it looks real, and it's in your quote unquote bank account. And you're like, okay. I don't know. It's just it's a feeling of like the unburdening of financial comfort is a pretty enormous feeling. And this all happened also while we had young kids at home, and those like to just not have to worry about, okay, like it's not to eat or have a roof over our head, but just like to just be able to kind of do life as anticipated. Like, look, we've done well. We're not flying around on private jets. We're not like, that's not at all what I'm talking about. Like, okay, like, yeah, you can buy the house that you want, not what you want. And you can buy the car and pay cash and not have to care. Like, you don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. Or if my mother and father-in-law need something, we can take care of them. Like, those sorts of things are just like the amount that pulls off of the weight of life is like the greatest thing in the entire world.
Emotional low of selling a business. I'm assuming, you did a great job of describing the retrade or the PetSmart example. Was there another emotional low that you would point to?
I think it's that you go through the process when you sell a company, especially to a large organization, where you fundamentally realize like you've sold your baby, and this thing that you've put your heart and soul and personality and everything that you have into is no longer yours. And like there's not usually like a seminal moment for that to be a reality, but it's like it like chips away, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like you're 3 weeks after the deal's done, and you're working in your quote unquote new company and your quote unquote new role, and all of a sudden you're like, oh boy, like I've got to ask somebody else permission to do that with the business. And it just really, it's probably something in the world of your like really damaging to your ego, really damaging to your control dynamics, or those sorts of things that like, entrepreneurs like to be in control. That's a big part of usually the personality dynamics of it. Like, just realizing that like it's not your child anymore, and you gotta like somebody else is raising it, and it's really hard. Like it's a very difficult sort of emotional sort of low point, and everyone hits it. Everyone gets there, and you kind of like when my teams have done, like there's always a lunch or a dinner or a visit to the bar on a Friday night where it's like everyone kind of like gets together and you kind of toast to what was. And then you move on, right? And be like, okay, but it's that sort of like cathartic, sort of like, yeah, okay, like we did this, but now we're not in that anymore.
Yeah, new phase.
Yeah.
Did you buy yourself a trophy? You mentioned you're not really a showy kind of guy, but tell me you bought yourself a car or.
No, I didn't. I'm a big experiences guy.
Okay.
And I had always had the idea that there's a thing called Wide Open Baja in Baja, Mexico, where you can drive Baja like race cars sort of things and I had always had it on my list. If I ever created an exit, I was going to take my close group of friends and buddies, and we were going to go do that. And so when that happened with PetSmart, 6 months later, the 10 of us went to spend like 3 days driving Baja cars through Baja, California, and it was epic. So
that's awesome.
So yes, but not in the sense of like, hey, I'm not a car guy. I'm not it's just not my thing. But yeah.
But a great memory to mark
like,
it.
And total trophy on the list of memories forever. So
well, I think it's well deserved for sure. 3 times through and amazing. You've now got a couple things on the go. I was going to ask you, where can people reach out to you if they wanted to say hi on social media? Maybe just touch on Vetted Capital and what you're doing there, and how people might reach you if they were interested in learning more.
Yeah. So Vetted Capital is I'm joining. It's a fund. Venture capital fund, 100% focused on the pet industry. I've done a couple things in the pet industry. I feel comfortable with it, but and so we're making investments in kind of like A, B round sort of growth sort of dynamics and trying to bring myself and a couple of other folks who have pretty deep experience both operationally and kind of functionally in the whole broad pet industry. And so trying to help entrepreneurs be successful in it, which I'm super excited about. So that's Vetted, Vetted, capital. And so doing that. And then I've just recently got involved with what I think is an amazing product, but it's in the whole kind of wellness world of protein. It's called Wild Society Nutrition. It's being led by our amazing CEO, a guy named TJ Dillashaw, who's a world champion UFC fighter. And obviously to be a world champion in anything physically, you've got to be pretty darn disciplined about your body and what's going on. And so we have protein powders, protein isolates, kind of different sort of, beef jerky snacks, protein stuff. So anyway, so Wild Society nutrition.com. And so we're doing that. If anyone wants to reach out to me, I have the blessing and the curse of having a name that is not owned by anybody else in the entire world. So if you search for Brock Weatherup, it is me. There is no second Brock Weatherup in the world. And so LinkedIn's usually the easiest way. And there's one of me, and so I can't ever say, oh, that's not who I am.
That wasn't me.
Yeah, no, that
was the other Brock Weatherup.
That happens, but anyway, anyone can reach out to me there, and I love just helping entrepreneurs find their way through. And the process of selling is a difficult, emotional, and also can be a great one. But just having people around you that help you look for the speed bumps or the along the road. That I think it's always helpful.
Well said, and what we try to do here. So we're very well aligned. So Vetted Capital, Wild Society Nutrition. We'll put both of those links in the show notes, along with Brock's LinkedIn profile. So you've got a shortcut to it over at builttosell.com. Brock, thanks for doing this.
Awesome. Thank you so much.